They told me the gate was inert. That was the word the lead archaeologist used on the first morning, standing with his tablet and his expensive boots in the pale dust of the plateau. Inert, as though something built before our sun had cooled, could be measured against the vocabulary of a man who had been alive for 53 years. I had been sweeping the site for 11 days by then. My name is Marin Solveig, and I was hired through a labor contractor in Reykjavik to maintain the excavation perimeter, to keep the walking paths clear, to remove stone chips after the drilling teams finished each evening, and to sweep the threshold of the gate each morning before the researchers arrived. It was not a prestigious role. I was paid in the same category as the equipment handlers and the cook. I ate at a separate table from the academics and nobody learned my last name. The gate itself had been uncovered 9 months before I arrived. It stood at the northern edge of the plateau, set into a ridge of pale rock that rose 30 meters above the dig floor. The structure was 31 meters tall and 16 wide at the base, carved from something that was not stone and not metal, though it resembled both. The surface was the color of deep water in winter, and it held no seam, no hinge, no visible mechanism. Whatever it opened onto was not visible from either side. The archaeologists had run every instrument they owned against it. They had cataloged its surface markings, which ran in columns from the base to the crown, and which no linguist had been able to parse, and they had concluded, in a paper I was not given, but overheard discussed at length, that the gate was a ceremonial structure, decorative, symbolic, built to be seen and not used. Inert. On the morning of the third day, a survey team from the consortium that was funding the dig arrived with a device the size of a shipping container, which they positioned 40 meters from the gate and aimed at its face. I watched from the equipment shed as the device powered up. It produced a sound I felt in my molars, rather than heard through my ears, a pressure that rose and flattened the dust in a ring around its base. The gate did not respond. The surface markings did not change. The researchers recorded this as a null result and noted it in the log as confirmation of the inert classification. On the fourth day, delegation from a government body, whose name I was not told, arrived in 2 vehicles. They had a different device, handheld, which one of them pressed directly against the gate's surface. At the center column of markings, the marking beneath the device went dark. Not the rest, only the one where contact was made. The delegation conferred among themselves and left without speaking to any of the site staff. The lead archaeologist watched their vehicles until they disappeared down the access road, and his face was the face of a man and has understood something he would have preferred not to. I swept the threshold that evening instead of the morning, because the day had run long, and the stone chips from the morning's drilling were still on the path. I used the wide broom, the one with the split handle that I had repaired with electrical tape in the second week. I worked from the outer edge toward the gate itself, moving in slow arcs, the way you do when you want the dust to settle away from you, rather than back into your face. The gate's base had a lip, a raised edge of the same dark material, perhaps 15 centimeters high, that formed a kind of threshold. Debris collected in the angle between the lip and the plateau floor, and it required the narrow broom to clear it properly. I set the wide broom against the ridge wall and took up the narrow one and crouched, and began to work in the tight space along the base. My left hand, steadying myself, came to rest flat against the gate's surface. I was not trying to open it. I was not thinking about it at all. I was thinking about the split in my right boot, where the sole had begun to separate, and whether the camp cook would have coffee left when I was done, and whether the weather coming in from the northwest, I had watched it build all afternoon, would bring rain or just the cold. The gate breathed. There is no other word for what it did. The surface under my palm did not vibrate. It did not hum. It expanded and contracted slowly the way a living chest does. And the warmth that came through the material was not the warmth of a machine or a stored heat, but something older, something that had been patient for a very long time and had simply been waiting for the correct weight to rest against it. I did not move. I do not know how long I held still. The light on the plateau was going amber with the low sun, and the dust hung in the air the way it does before a weather change, and everything was very quiet. The markings came alive from my palm outward, not all at once. One column first, The one nearest my hand, each glyph illuminating in sequence from the base upward like a line of lamps lit one after another by a careful hand. Then the adjacent columns, then the ones beyond those, spreading across the full face of the gate in a slow wave that reached the crown and held. Was not what I would have called light. It was closer to the quality of very clear water over pale stone, particular blue-white, that has no heat in it, but makes everything it touches look more real than it was before. I stood up slowly. My hand stayed on the surface. I did not choose to keep it there. It seemed the wrong kind of action to pull it away. The gate did not open. It had never been about opening. I understood then, though I could not have said how I understood it. The gate was not a door. It was a recognition system, and it had been waiting for the particular arrangement of a particular person, and it had found what it was waiting for, and now it was simply attending to that fact. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere the markings touched. Not loud, not the way a machine broadcasts. More the way a bell speaks when the sound has settled from the first strike into the sustained note, present in the air rather than directed at you, it said. Still standing, Warden of the Gate. 6 words, I counted them afterward, turning them over in my mind the way you turn a coin to verify the image on both sides. 6 words in a language I had never heard, and I understood every one of them, which is something I have since spent considerable time trying to explain to people who were not there, and have not managed it to my own satisfaction. My grandmother's name had been Marin before mine, and her grandmother's before that. The name runs back through my mother's line as far as anyone's traced it, which is not far. We are not a family that kept records. What the gate told me, in the space between its words and my understanding of them, was that the line runs much further than that there had always been someone in my lineage who knew without being told, when a threshold needed keeping. Not guarding in the way of soldiers, keeping the way a caretaker keeps. Present, accountable, there when the dust collects, and the equipment sheds rust, and the academics write their papers and move on. The markings held for a long time after the voice had finished. I stayed with my hand on the surface until the last light left the plateau, and the temperature dropped, and I finally stepped back and picked up my narrow broom and finished clearing the base. I did not report what had happened. I wrote nothing in the site log, which I was not authorized to write in anyway. I told no one. I finished my contract 11 days later and took the transport to Reykjavik, and said nothing to the contractor who processed my paperwork. There are things that belong to you that are not made smaller by being kept private. There are inheritances that do not require witnesses to be real. The gate recognized me in the late afternoon of an ordinary working day, while I was thinking about my boot and the coffee and the weather, and it called me by the name my line has carried for longer than any of the documents in any of the institutions that funded that dig could contain. I was a cleaner. I am a warden. Those two things are not in conflict. They never were. I still have the narrow broom. The electrical tape on the handle has gone gray with age, and the bristles are worn to half their length. I keep it in the corner of my workroom at home, leaning against the wall the way it leaned against the ridge on the plateau. Some mornings I look at it for a while before I start the day. There is a gate somewhere that knows my name. That is enough. Teat, that has always been enough.